friends, this is Christopher davis-shannon, and today I'm going to break down a technique for you that enables you to play melody and chords at the same exact time. Even if you're not into solo uke playing, you might find that this is actually quite good for accompaniment as well. This is something that the great Cliff Edwards or Ukulele Ike did quite frequently in his own playing. We're going to break down the technique in actually two different ways, and you can choose which one you prefer, and then we're going to put it all together in a few bars of an arrangement of the old tune Chinatown, My Chinatown. So first up is we need to figure out how we're going to isolate these individual notes. And I'm going to show you two different ways to do this. Cliff Edwards would typically use his thumb for this, and many of us have probably plucked individual notes with our thumb before, but this is going to be a slightly different motion because we're going to be following this up with accompaniment or strumming. We need to keep the wrist loose. We can't keep it down here and just have the thumb. So what we need to do is act as if we are strumming, but hitting the note. But instead of coming down with our first finger like we typically do, we're going to keep the thumb close to the first finger and enable it to just rest on the string and pluck, but we're not plucking from the thumb, we're using the motion of the wrist to pull out the note. So let's do half notes on this. So 2 beats apiece. Let's put our ring finger on the 3rd fret of our A string, giving us a C major chord. It's going to sound like this, and just join in when you're feeling comfortable. 2, 3, 4. Good, and remember to just keep that wrist motion, and you'll see why when we add in the strum that makes this much easier to do. But obviously, instead of only using the thumb and using the wrist as well, the accuracy is harder because we're making a larger motion. So this is something you want to practice in isolation. You want to be able to pick out any darn note that you so please. So now let's do a little exercise just isolating all of these individual notes. We're going to put down our C major chord again, and we're going to walk our way down. So we're going to play first the A string, E string, C string, G string, and then right back up. And you can just loop this. Try it with me. And C string, and G string, C string, E string. That should be pretty easy, but it might take a little bit of time to get used to. Again, this is a new motion that you're probably not terribly used to. Now, the second way that you can do this, and a way that I use quite a bit of the time, it gives you almost the same exact sound, but it comes from a different motion. I had mentioned keeping the thumb close to the first finger, but what you can do is actually brace it behind like this, much like George Formby would strum, to give a little bit of rigidity to your hand. And if you leave the index finger just poking out a little bit there, we can actually catch with the pad of our index finger all of those notes. You might find this a little bit harder on the inner strings, but when we put the motions together, some of my students have found this easier to do than using the thumb. And as we're using the pad of the finger, it really replicates the same sound. So we can do the same thing. And what happens with this is it reverses the motion. Instead of a down strum plucking, we're now going to do an up strum, and that's going to set us up to strum the chord directly afterwards. Either works just fine, but let's try that same exact exercise, walking down a C major chord on individual strings with this motion now. Here's your A string, E string, C string, G string, C string. So you can see that this is a good technique that you can use to really, in the middle of strumming even, to pluck out individual notes on an up strum. So now let's add in the harmony or the chords to this. And this is going to be identical regardless of how you pluck that individual string. Now in this lesson, we're going to keep the rhythm very simplistic. We're going to use sort of an oom-pa rhythm. We're always going to have these melody notes on beats 1 and 3, and we're going to play the chords on beats 2 and 4. And this is a very common usage of this, but just know that you can play consecutive individual notes together. You can strum chords for longer, and you can mix this up. I just want to keep it simple so that we can get the basic concepts here and then apply it to the arrangement in just a minute. So I'm going to use my thumb for this just to show the motion at first. So we could put down our C major chord again, and let's do this again, just the individual note on the A string to keep it simple. So you're going to come down, hit the A string, strum through, and you can see that my hand mostly resets. My wrist motion is just the same as strumming. All right, and now let's do the exercise we were doing previously, walking down each individual string, but now with strums in between. So it's going to sound like this. I'll play it once and then join in with me the second time. Here's the top. A string, E string, C string, G string, C string, E string, A string. You'll find the index finger version of this where we're going up, you might find easier because it makes a more consistent motion with the wrist. If we do the same exercise, I'm going up strum, down strum, instead of all consecutive, essentially down strums. And it looks something like this. So experiment with both of these and see what works for you. And as I said, depending on the context or where the single notes come in rhythmically, if it's coming on an offbeat, you might want to mix up the two and use them both in one arrangement. So once you're comfortable with this, let's head on over to the next little section and let's look at the first 8 measures of the tune Chinatown, My Chinatown. This little tune's well over 100 years old at this point, but it's a very simple melody and harmony, so it's a great way to really look at this technique while putting it into practice, because ultimately we want to play music, not just a bunch of exercises. So much like with what I mentioned before, I've changed the rhythm on a couple measures of this, just so we're not doing too many things and the rhythm is consistent throughout with everything. So for the most part, the melody, we're going to be playing half notes, and then we're going to be playing quarter note strums on the chords on beats 2 and 4. So let's walk through this first and get the chord structure down. Let's learn the chords so our left hand knows what it's doing and we don't have to worry about anything else. So the first measure, we're going to be starting on a C major chord. Second measure, we're going to go to a G augmented chord, which is open, 3, 3, 2. You might not be familiar with this one. Right back to C major for 2 more bars, and then we're staying on that C major. We're going to add a C diminished 7th on the 3rd beat of measure 6 in here, which is going to be 2, 3, 2, 3. And this one can be omitted. If you're finding trouble with this, but the rest of the chords are okay, just leave out the C diminished chord when we get to it. It's not necessary. And then we're going to round it out on a G7th chord. So let me just strum the chords for you so you can hear them first, and I'll put them up behind me so you can strum along with me. We want to get the harmony in our heads. It's going to sound like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. C, G augmented, C, we stay on C, 2 beats, C diminished, G7, and we're going to stop right there. That's as much of the tune as we're going to do. So take a couple minutes and just familiarize yourself with that chord progression so you're not worrying too much about what chords we are playing. These are basic root position chords that you likely know already. So now let's take the chords out of this and look at what the melody is. As I said, the melody is mostly half notes. Our first melody note is actually the C on the 3rd fret of our A string, just where it is with the C major chord. We're going to play that, and then we're going to play D on the 5th fret, and then down to 2. And you'll see this is over our G augmented chord. It's already built into the chord, and then open G. So let's listen to just the first 2 measures of the melody, and pluck this as if you were doing your pluck strum, but we don't actually have to strum everything right now. Good. And then we're going to go to an open A, up to B on the 2nd fret of our A string, and then round it out on an open G. So here's our first line, or our first 4 measures of the tune. 3, 4. Now let's look at the second line of this before we add the chords in. So we're going to repeat what we just did. We're going to go open A, 2nd fret for our B, and then open G. And then over top of this C diminished chord, we're going to play the A on the 2nd fret of our G string, which in the context of a C diminished chord is really a B double flat, but we're going to call it an A because it's much easier to look at on a piece of music, despite technically being wrong. And then we're going to end the phrase on the F on the 1st fret of our E string, which happens to be contained in the G7th chord that we are playing. So before you put all of this together, if you're not familiar with the tune especially, memorize this melody line. It's only a few notes, but the less you're thinking about this, the more that you can think about the right hand technique. And also practice this with just the melody and just the chords before you put it all together and try to apply this technique. But this is what it's all going to sound like when we put it together. It's a nice, easy melody, only a few simple chords, and if you want, you can even substitute out a G7 for that G augmented. So you can do this entire run with just 2 chords. If you're one of my Patreon subscribers, hop over there. I have the entire tune arranged for you all. If you're not currently over there, please do consider joining us. We do songs and lessons like this every single week, and we really delve into more of the technique and theory side of playing this wonderful little instrument. I'll see y'all over there.